25 miles south of Pittsburg, in the heart of one of Pennsylvania's industrial valleys, along the banks of the Monongahela River. 4 million gallon storage tanks mark the site of a past disaster. In 1988, when the oil storage facility in Florida, Pennsylvania was owned by Ashland Oil, different tanks located in the same spots held fuel oil. On January 2nd of that year, a typically frigid winter day, a 40-year-old tank was being refilled for the first time after being disassembled in Cleveland, Ohio, and reassembled in Florida. Then, in less than 1 second, the tank cracked vertically, releasing a tidal wave of about 3.8 million gallons of oil.
My backpack was loose, and then somebody took it that way. Who would take my stuff?
Wait, what? Who was that guy, and what was he even saying?
I have no idea. Well, anyways, let's consult a real expert here. This is Joseph Salzillo. He's our principal investigator. Joe, what exactly happened on this day?
Yeah, so actually, the pressure buildup from the oil caused the tank, the skin of the shell to burst backwards, where the oil of the tank traveled over the dike in this case.
That's very interesting. So after the oil passed over the dike, here surrounding tanks were affected from this oil. What exactly happened?
Yeah, so after the oil traveled over the dike, it went over to another empty tank where it caused a dent about 20 feet up in that empty tank.
Wow, that's quite a large force we're dealing with.
It's definitely a big force, John.
After the oil passed over the last containment dike, it went in the direction of a parking lot containing a drain. The oil flowed down that drain into the Monongahela River. Experts estimated that between 700,000 and 800,000 gallons of oil entered the river, making this the worst oil spill in the history of this industrialized valley. The north-flowing current of the Monongahela River carried the oil past a number of smaller communities into Pittsburg and beyond. Towns along the river were forced to shut off their water intake systems. Tens of thousands of people were without regular water service for up to 8 days. Overall, the spill temporarily contaminated drinking supplies for about 1 million people in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. Contractors hired by Ashland attempted to collect as much oil as possible from the river's surface. By the time Cunha and other investigators arrived, the oil in the dike areas had been pumped out to barges.
So, were there any telltale signs of brittle fracture you observed?
Yeah, so as I approached the containment vessel, I noticed that there were arrow-like markings heading in opposite directions, similar to chevron stripes on a military uniform, where in one direction there were arrows pointing upward, and in the opposite direction those arrows were pointing downward, both leading to a strong black dot about 3/4 of an inch thick on the containment vessel wall.
At that exact spot was a dark area, roughly 3/4 of an inch long. This is where it all started.
So this here is actually a close-up of the black dot in the structure, where that black dot formed during the cutting process of either putting the structure together or cutting the structure apart. That black dot was due to carbon and oxygen being present during that cutting operation.
Even today, small defects like this are never uncommon in these gigantic tanks. It's pretty much impossible to prevent these types of defects during welding operations. But usually, weak spots in these tanks today are just small leaks, which are easily cleaned up. But if you think about the speed of this collapse, the clean split, and the telltale chevron markings, investigators quickly identified brittle fractures, which is often a problem during weaker points of steel dating from the 1940s and earlier. This was obviously the cause of this catastrophic failure. Brittle fracture has been known to plague a variety of older structures. Even these huge, look at that ship, even that huge ship. Tests revealed that that was the main reason of failure for this tank. It was built in the early 1940s. And you also have to think about the weather. Sub-zero temperatures, -12 degrees Fahrenheit. The old tank's steel dropped to a BCC structure and was even more brittle. Welds are also weaker on the inner portions of the plate. So when workers disassembled the tank in Cleveland, cuts were made away from the original welds. Because if you re-weld the same area, that actually makes the material weaker. However, when the tank was put back together in November, the defect happened in an especially bad spot.
So Joe, can you describe in detail where this fracture occurred and why it happened?
Yeah, absolutely, Jonathan. So I actually drew up a pretty accurate representation of this diagram. Is where the tank opened up. It goes down further, but you know the paper doesn't supply that much space. But right here is of interest. This right here is called the T-joint. This is where the horizontal weld and the vertical weld met up, and this actually caused weld decay in this area, which was the sole cause of the fracture. Thanks.
Once a tank is built, welds, including T-joints, are inspected to find defects that aren't visible on the surface, like the one in the Ashland tank. Inspectors routinely use an X-ray system for metal, known as radiography. Following the investigation of this spill, state and federal agencies put new procedures in place. A federal grand jury indicted Ashland Oil for negligently discharging oil into the Monongahela River. The company eventually paid almost $7 million in state and federal fines.